Hi, I'm Professor Beck Strah.
And I'm Professor Eric Bronson, and you're listening to Prison Breakdown.
2, 3, break!
Hate to spoil his fun, but we're gonna bust out of here.
2, 3, break!
I'm locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me.
2, 3, break!
I can honestly say I'm a changed man. No danger to society here. God's honest truth.
2, 3, break!
I'm not leaving this cell. I'll get out my way. The right way.
2, 3, break!
Ahoy, dudes!
Ahoy!
Welcome back to another...
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Bronson. Welcome back to another thrilling episode of Prison Breakdown. We are back after a prolonged absence due to holidays and Eric coming up with every virus and illness that is under the sun.
Illness. Yeah, just call me Petri Dish, Professor Petri Dish. I'll blame it on the... See, that's, say it all. The kids ruin everything. I blame the kids. I was around the hockey team, and they just got me sick. Not only because of the viruses, but because of their effort on the ice. It's sickening.
and the food at Outback Steakhouse when you guys went out to celebrate.
Oh, no, I'm trying. We went to this wild place up in Marlborough, Massachusetts called Apex. This place was absolutely huge. It had, you could throw axes, laser tag, ropes course, go-karts, bowling alley. It was huge, and the kids had so much fun at it. It was unbelievable. And no, we're not being paid to say that. It was some place that was completely unexpected. I don't know how the beer was because I was, on the meds, but the pizza was below average. I can say that.
The real Chuck E. Cheese, yeah.
If we're, yeah, exactly. And, as we know that having a strong undercarriage is important when it comes to the crust, and it was awful. You pick it up and it's all floppy and soggy cardboard type, no. But yeah, it was not good. Not good. No.
If you could compare it to a national brand of pizza, what would you compare it to?
Bad Pizza Hut. Bad Pizza Hut. Not even Pizza Hut. Bad Pizza Hut.
So, Eric, you and the team go to a place like this in Mass. What do you gravitate towards? Do you go to the bowling alley? Do you go to the axe throwing? What's your jam?
Oh, it was all the adults went downstairs and just sat around the bar and had food, which was right by the bowling alley. But the bowling alley wasn't a normal bowling alley. It was all the neon bowling, but lots of opportunity for fun there. And again, the place was absolutely massive. The footprint and the square footage of this place was unbelievable. It was huge. Kids had a blast.
Do you think it was like an abandoned warehouse or something, or a derelict warehouse that they reappropriated or something like that? Or
no, that would be nice if it was. This was, I think, new construction type. Now, it's a few years old, but it's still massive, just massive.
Yeah. Here's an idea. What if we took former prisons and turned them into like bowling alleys and laser tag? Like doing laser tag would be awesome in an old prison.
So cool. Yeah, you could do a laser tag Attica.
Yep.
Yeah, that'd be so cool.
You know who would get into that are the airsoft folks. They would go. Oh yeah, paintball, airsoft in an old prison. They would go berserk over that. You just put some obstacles up in the day room. They would lose their minds to be able to play there. That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, is airsoft the new paintball?
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah, I think the folks running same crowd for the most part. Mm-hmm. I think airsoft's a little bit more painful.
Yeah.
So pulls more. Yeah. Either way, that alpha male machismo crowd just loves that shit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The cool guys, the guys who are like Like very military, but never served any time in the military.
Ooh, ROTC guys. ROTC
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah,
we go.
ROTC guys. Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Mhm.
But boy, by the way they dress, their little Halloween outfits they wear there, whew, you'd think they served.
Stolen valor, bro.
Yeah, when they wear their medals to paintball.
What do you think is the paintball equivalent to the Purple Heart?
That's a tough one.
Yeah. I mean, what color would it be? Because paintballs are all types of colors. So,
Right.
Oh, that's
like
a
a
good
tie-dye
point.
heart, maybe.
I don't know.
We're stretching here.
Maybe something yellow.
Yeah.
Huh.
Some high vis. Ooh, yeah, like the high vis vest color.
There you go.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we kneecapped that conversation.
All right. So, Eric, you got any cool prison news this week? Is it time for the razor wire? Are we going down to the razor wire?
I think we
What's
can.
the segment called?
News hot off the razor wire.
Oh, yeah.
Fresh news, hot off the razor wire.
All right. So during our last get together, we talked about the bill that bipartisan bill that was going to look at the Federal Bureau of Prisons and their medical their medical availability for inmates. Not much has happened since then, but something that just is. I mean, this is hot off the razor wire. Oscar Pistorius, the disgraced South African sprinter who was known as the Blade Runner, was just released from prison earlier today. So he served, he was in prison for 11 years for the slaying of his girlfriend, for which he was found guilty of 11 years ago. So he, that's some pretty serious time. He, he was locked up in jail and then did 10 years in a prison there in South Africa, and a place called Adridgeville Correctional Center. And so he is now out on the streets and supervised release. So their form of parole, obviously for, as we see throughout much of the world, much shorter sentences for murder, but he is back out on the streets and will be getting back to his normal life. His original sentence was 13 and a half years, but he got out a little early due to good behavior.
Do you think there's any chance for him to go back to living a normal life? Like the man presumably made his living as an Olympian. I wonder if he'd even be able to compete in that sphere again.
No, after 11 years of non-practice, absolutely not.
Yeah, I don't.
I mean, the window to be an Olympian is such a short time anyway. Like, there's very few Olympians that make it past 2 Olympics. Very, very few that are actually in 3. So, 12 years is too much to ask for someone who was a former Olympian, I think.
That is crazy to think about. Eric, you're an athletic man. Was the Olympics ever a consideration in your future?
Oh, definitely. When I was in middle school. Not only was I going to the Olympics, I was going to play in the NFL. So I was going to wrestle in the Olympics and then play in the NFL in my spare time, But
you'd be just like Goldberg.
I've been fortunate enough to be around a few Olympians and individuals that have wrestled for the United States while they happen to be training at Ohio State for wrestling. Mark Coleman was one of them, and when I was in high school, I was already a large individual. I was already 6'3" and like 260 pounds. And Mark Coleman threw me around like I was an absolute rag doll. Like I mean, it was such a joke for him to just, and at that point in my life, I was used to pushing people around on a wrestling mat or the football field and, normally getting the better of other people. It was unbelievable how it just like almost did not exist. I couldn't do anything. It was just, it was freakish how much more of a, of an athlete and a strong human he was than anybody I had ever been around in my entire life. It's a different breed of individual.
Now, let me put it out there. It sounds like you had a great build to be a bully. Were you a bully?
No, unfortunately not. Should have been.
Wasted potential.
I could have put people in their place.
Lunch money now.
Yeah, you could be rich from lunch money.
Yeah, exactly. At 50 cents every day, right?
It adds up. Interest,
baby.
Yeah, exactly.
Start early. It's your retirement right
there. Right. Especially since I'm not very far from it anymore, but...
Don't you dare think about it.
No, I'm not that close yet. Yeah. But plus, we got too good of a gig here at Roger Williams University. This is the golden ticket of all jobs. I love it.
Yeah, right?
I love it.
You're going to have to put me in the ground at work.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I want to be buried right on campus.
Bury me in my office.
Yeah, I want to be out there next to the Roger Williams statue.
Me and Raj hanging out.
Yeah, exactly.
in eternity.
Right. Anyway, so that's the news hot off the razor wire. Is Oscar, the Blade Runner, is now free, and returned to society while under supervision, some form of supervision, again on parole there. So he back into society. I don't know what he's going to do. There's absolutely nothing in this article that says what he's going to be doing. So be interesting. Who knows? Maybe he might end up trying to get into coaching for sprinters or motivational speaker. I don't know if it's for runners or for people who want to
aspiring murderers.
Yeah, aspiring murderers. Exactly. So
I don't know that he was that good of a murderer though. If you were a good murderer,
no,
I'm saying that in like the being good at it, like
right.
He would have gotten away with it.
Right. Correct. Yeah, no, I don't think there was a whole lot of planning. I think this was a pretty typical murder, which, I think is odd to say, right? A normal murder.
Sure.
Yeah. Right. I think it was pretty typical. He just got angry and exploded.
Crime
rage
of
kill.
passion. Yes.
Yeah, rage killing. So
yeah, it's we say this and joke around about this, but our hearts do go out to the victim's family and victim herself. It always astounds me to look at other countries' sentencing structures and how inflated our sentences are compared to everywhere else.
Yeah.
Especially for murder. You look at even the death penalty is relatively rare amongst other developed countries.
Right. I think it's part of the whole, prison industrial complex. If we build it, they will come, right? And they will come in not only high numbers, but in long sentences. Man, we like to sentence people for a long period of time. But murder, you got a 13-year sentence. If we're looking at a typical murder sentence around the United States, you're looking at 25 years minimum, right?
Yeah, unreal. And while there should be some punishment for murdering someone, obviously, there's got to be a better way.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm not saying I have all the answers, but our lack of innovation is staggering.
No, we don't like new things, right?
No, we hate new things. Yeah. We like status quo.
Yeah. No, and we like being punitive as well.
Now, Eric, you have any other news on that razor wire?
No, that's the hottest ticket off the razor wire today. Is I think is the release of Blade Runner.
That's such a cool nickname too. Like, wait, did he murder his girlfriend with a knife or blade?
Oh no,
because
no.
I'm wondering if that's how he got the nickname. I'm not trying to make a joke.
So, he got the nickname because he did not have legs below the knees, and he ran on prosthetics.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so that's how he got the nickname Blade Runner, not because he's a slasher.
So, I'm just saying it makes sense.
No, he
was he the first to like really take off on those prosthetic, I guess, blades, for lack of a better term for them?
So he ran in the Paralympics and dominated the Paralympics, and then went through some major court cases to run against fully able-bodied individuals. And so he ran in the 2012 London Olympics. He didn't medal, but he was about 3 or 4 seconds off the winning pace in the 400-meter race, in the semifinals. He didn't make it to the finals, but so anyways, but yeah, he excuse me, he won gold medals in the Paralympics 3 Paralympics in a row. Yeah.
Damn it, dude.
Yeah.
I'm going to put it out there. I am so bored by the Olympics. I have not watched the Olympics in years. It's so dull to me. I get that it's incredible athleticism, but it's not that interesting to watch like a marathon. Like, you ever try to watch the marathon on the Olympics? It's unwatchable.
Well, you don't like watching people just run continuously for 2.5 to 3 hours?
No.
So, are there any events in the Olympics that draw you in?
Gymnastics is something that's like a really crazy physical feat. Every now and then something will, like, I watched that first episode of that Bulls documentary. The what was it called? The Last Dance.
Yeah.
And just watching Jordan and his athleticism, like he just does crazy things with his body that you are incredible.
Yeah.
And something like that like draws my eye, but otherwise I have so little investment in sports that I find it hard to care about.
Yeah.
And it seems it's so nationalistic,
right,
and that's not a thing I care about either.
Yeah. It's kind of that part of it. I don't, love the whole idea that, that patriotism is tied to how, somebody does diving off the 10-meter platform. That just doesn't draw me in. But yeah, the athleticism does. It's, I very, very closely follow the wrestling, just because I absolutely love it. But a lot of the other sports I don't really get into. But no, just and to answer Britt's question, he, Oscar did not stab his girlfriend when he murdered her. He actually shot her. So he claimed that he thought, his defense was he thought she was somebody breaking into the house and it was self-defense, and shot her. So
when I was starting as a corrections officer in 2012, it was I was about to go off to training to the academy. I was a fresh officer off of field officer training on my own, and I was one night I was about to go to work in the sex offender unit, and the night before, I had talked to a field training officer who said, "Oh yeah, I was working in that sex offender unit last night. Those guys were watching women's gymnastics. You better be careful about it. You don't know what they're thinking about when they're watching that. there's all these young girls in leotards. And I was like, okay, yeah. And he said, yeah, I shut that right down. I said to these perverts, you got to turn off the TV and no more TV tonight. And so I was like, okay, yeah. And then I go to work in the unit the next day, and they had on women's gymnastics. And following his advice, I was like, hey, all right, we're shutting this down. And everyone turns around toward me, and they're like, what did you say? And I was like, and just then another officer comes through the door, and they're like, hey, Strah, it's your turn. You're up for training. And I was like, oh, okay, good. And I thought about it. Like I've had years to think about this afterward. And that's not fair. Like, first off, it's gymnastics. I'm not there to judge them of their crime or whatever their crime is. It probably has nothing to do with women's gymnastics,
right? And
the fact that they're watching the Olympics it's none of my business. And so I did talk to one of the unit workers afterward, and he was like, oh yeah, they were pretty heated, and I had the chance to apologize to him. But your field training officers aren't always right. That's the moral of this story.
Yeah. It's and I think gymnastics is one of the most highly watched sports during the Olympics. I think it does very well, but I think it has more to do with the female audience that's out there, just like figure skating during the Winter Olympics, which does, I think it's the highest rated Winter Olympic sport in terms of viewership. Yeah,
makes sense.
Well, shall we get to the main event?
Absolutely.
All right. Today we are talking about Sing Sing, the prison in New York State. Have you heard?
Oh yeah, and I've been.
I'm so jealous.
Yeah, it's got a long family history of over there in Ossining, New York, and so I'm tad bit familiar with Sing Sing, and I was lucky enough to be able to visit there a while ago. I know it's been a while, but yeah, I've been fortunate enough to visit there, and it's definitely one of the most unique correctional facilities I've ever been to. It's
how so?
Well, first off, you got a train track that runs through the middle of the institution.
It's so cool.
Yeah. It's just, now granted, when you're on the train and you're heading up the Hudson there, unless you know what's coming up, you go blowing through it pretty quick. But yeah, you got correctional settings on both sides of the train tracks. It's just really, unique, and it's old, and there's a lot of history there. We're talking, going back 200 years almost now. This facility was established, so it's great. It's just a really great place. When you geek on prisons, this is one of the ones you really kind of gets you, because it just got a lot of history to it, and obviously tied to New York City, where we're sending you up the river. This is the one they were talking about.
Yeah, that's where the expression comes from, is because it's on the Hudson River. So people would say you're getting sent up the river. It's shorthand for you're going to prison.
Yeah.
But you didn't know that, did you, producer Britt?
I certainly didn't.
Yeah, that's a fun fact.
Yeah.
And can you tell us, how did you get a tour there? What were the circumstances?
I just, it was while I was teaching over in Connecticut, and just happened to call up and say, hey, I'll be in the area. Really was going over in October to be near Sleepy Hollow, geeking out on the whole Halloween thing. And this was just, right down the road, going over to the prison. So I said, hey, I'm coming over there. Do you mind if I get a quick tour? And like, yeah, come on in, which was great, because at the time Connecticut wasn't letting anybody into their prisons. So I, this wasn't long after I finished a PhD, and I was trying to get into as many prisons as I could, just so I could see, and just so that I could talk firsthand about being able to, say, hey, here's an old Auburn style prison, and be able to talk about here's one that still exists and is in an operation. So yeah, they were more than willing to say, yeah, come on in. So early 2000s. So yeah, you were still running around elementary school then, right?
I was but a lad.
Yeah.
So our story for Sing Sing starts in 1825 when the state of New York bought the land for $20,100. It has been termed over time American Bastille, also called the House of Fear, and our favorite, it's known as the Big House. The Big House.
Absolutely.
It's a name that's caught on for other prisons, just as shorthand for prison. So in May of 1825, they had 100 incarcerated men relocated from Auburn Prison to the supposed location of Sing Sing. At this time, Auburn Prison was still an operating facility. These men were relocated to the site of Sing Sing without a place to receive them or a wall to enclose them. And incarcerated men were made to build their own prison. It's like a little like digging your own grave.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what still goes on in the South. They still use inmate labor to build prison facilities. They're going to add on to a facility down there. They're like, hey, let's use the folks we have locked up. So they're learning from the good old days.
Yeah. So for the initial cell block that they built, incarcerated men were forced to dig and gather rock from local quarries. It is built largely from what they call Sing Sing marble, which is another name for limestone. And the cells were about 7 feet deep, 3 feet 3 inches wide, and 6 feet 7 inches high. So consider packing a guy like Bronson into there. It might feel a little like a coffin.
Yeah.
And that's a tight coffin, too.
A tight squeeze. Especially if you, if you have any, claustrophobia, that's tight. Ugh.
Yeah, right. So they had this for about 3 years, and then in 1828, inmates got moved into new cells. And do you know where the name Sing Sing comes from?
It comes from, isn't it shortened up from Ossining? And
Ossining is where it's located. That's one thought. The other thought is that there's an Indian tribe, a Native American or indigenous tribe named Sint Sinks.
Okay.
I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it means stone upon stone.
That makes sense. That is stone upon stone there. Whew.
But it quickly developed this reputation for dread and terror. There was a lot of water torture. There was waterboarding. There was some drowning inmates. And water torture was used as this form of punishment to get confessions from inmates.
To me, that just, hearing about that and thinking about that just starts to take my breath away. You just, when they start talking about waterboarding and awful things like that, that's just, no pun intended. It just sounds awful.
It is a super gnarly history.
Yeah.
Let's talk some notable inmates.
All right.
Eric, do you know of any notable inmates at this place?
Oh, boy. I'm trying to think of some of the really good ones that, when we're talking about the history, when we talk about New York City and the criminals that would go from New York City, sending them up the river. Boy, I'm trying to think of who would be a well-known one. I know there was a Capone there, but it's not the famous Al Capone that everybody was looking at. Louis Capone, right? No relation to Al Capone. But he was convicted of murder, I believe. But yeah, I think they were leaders of Murder Inc. I believe the infamous gang there in New York City, back in the 40s. I don't, but I'm not 100% certain. But I'm pretty certain he was there. Louis Capone was there because everybody was like, "Oh, there was a Capone in Sing Sing," but they're thinking of the wrong one. Al Capone obviously was never there.
Yeah. So Louis Capone was a notable one as a gang leader. We also had a famous bank robber named Willie Sutton. You ever hear of Willie Sutton?
No.
So he's famous as a notorious bank robber. And in December of 1932, he actually escaped Sing Sing with other inmates. They obtained some hacksaw blades.
Nice.
Sawed through the cell bars. He's also a skilled lockpicker.
Oh.
He was able to get through some prison doors, but one of the doors was unpickable. So interestingly, it's still a mystery to us. We don't know for sure how he was able to escape. It's thought there's some conspiracy out there that maybe he had help from an officer, but there's nothing to substantiate this.
Somebody left the door unlocked for him.
Right?
Yeah.
That or somebody's not doing their job.
Somebody helped him out.
So Willie Sutton, he makes it out for about a year. And then early 1934, he gets captured in Philadelphia again. So he did not stay on the run.
Not for very long.
But another interesting one was Albert Fish. Are you familiar with that name?
Yeah. Bad dudes. Wasn't he a child rapist and serial killer? One of the famous.
Yeah. He was born Hamilton Fish. Hamilton! Which is also a bad name, but Albert Fish is what he went by. He took the name of his dead brother.
Ooh. Didn't he? Wasn't he also
he worked as a prostitute.
Yeah, wasn't he also a cannibal?
Oh, I'm getting to that.
Okay. I'll wait.
He worked as a prostitute, raped a number of young men, but he was a cannibal. He would prey on children, and he would also target physically disabled persons and African Americans. So he targeted people he thought were vulnerable at the time. He said he was addicted to sexual mutilation, and he was actually declared fit to stand trial, even though many people protested against this and thought he was not. And he was given the death penalty at Sing Sing in 1936. He is one of our more prolific serial killers. He admitted to killing over 100 children.
Whoa.
But he was only convicted for killing one, and a child named Grace Budd, and that's the reason he was executed. His final words were written in letters, and his lawyer actually refused to read them because they were so gruesome. And so his lawyer is the only one who really knows all the details.
You got to wonder how Hollywood has not grasped on to this guy and his story. They're always looking for true crime cases or murderers. How have they not grabbed on to? What'd you say his real name was? Hamilton Fish. Hamilton Fish. And he went by Albert. How did they not grasp onto this guy and his horrible things that he's done? People would go nuts over this.
Oh, for sure. He's got a really bizarre story, and his lawyer even refused to say anything about that final letter. The attorney said, "It's the most filthy thing I've ever read. I'm not going to release it to the public." But it's rumored that his final words were, "I don't even know why I'm here," before they pulled the switch.
Whoa, really?
So, yeah, just a non-remorseful...
Living in denial, huh?
Yeah, living in denial.
Did he say it was all fake news about fake news?
Yeah, he was a real like trying to turn the tables on January 6th, like ahead of its time. He was like a Nostradamus.
Yeah. Antifa ate that kid. Jeez, wasn't me.
They also called it the Death House for a while. The first executions in New York from electric chair were conducted at Auburn Prison. And from 1891 to 1963, Sing Sing was called the Death House. And they performed 614 executions through electrocution, eight being women.
614. My goodness. That's a lot.
Right? That's over 70 years or so. Yeah, it's a lot.
Do we know how many how many different electric chairs they ended up using. Because like when I was in Kentucky and I went to the death chamber there, they had just recently cleaned it up. And what I mean by cleaning it up is you have to, where the electrodes are, where they strap you in, where your wrist and your ankles, that gets all charred. And so they'd just taken the time to refinish the wood, scrape off all the burnt marks. And so I'm sure, you just got to wonder how many different electric chairs they went through, because that was quite the time to, quite the extensive amount of time and number of people to be executing for them to have one chair. I wonder if we can find somebody to come join us on the podcast one time who has a specific history of capital punishment in New York and how many different chairs they employed there.
Yeah. So to the best of my knowledge, it was only one chair because Auburn, Sing Sing, and Dannemora all had electric chairs. So inmates could be at any one of those three facilities and receive the death penalty by electrocution. And that was up until 1915. And after 1915, Sing Sing was the only facility that had a chair and actually used the chair. But it was eliminated at all the other institutions because New York felt there was no need for three chairs. They initially overestimated how often it would need to be used.
They were hoping to execute a whole lot more, huh?
But for a long time, New York, the death penalty today is not used nearly as much as it was then. So you think about 614 executions in New York alone over a 70-year period. And in modern day, across the entire United States, it's between like 30 to 45, roughly, executions per year across all 50 states. So thankfully, it has been like curbed in its use a lot. It is, I'll say thankfully, I'm pro abolishing the death penalty. I think it's not enough to curb it down to whatever, 35 a year, whatever it is. But at very least, it is less frequently used.
Thankfully.
So inmates could gather to hear the condemned's last words, and they could be there for the execution proceedings and even for the autopsy after the execution. And interestingly, in the 1920s and 1930s, Sing Sing carried out more executions than any other U.S. prison, which probably isn't that surprising hearing about it being the death house for years. And executions typically carried out on Thursday. They called it Black Thursdays.
Did they give a reason why Thursdays was the day? I mean, is just making it so it was a slow news day on Fridays, and they'll make the headlines, or what?
I think it's like a cute branding thing, like Black Friday, that type of thing. But Black Friday was already out there, so they had to go like I don't know, Black Thursday.
I mean, they already have Thirsty Thursday, so.
And it's Taco Tuesday, so it can't be Tuesday.
Right. Is Thursday really the best day to kill people?
No, because and here's the thing: do you want to?
You don't want to kill someone on a weekend.
Yeah, well, one of the articles that I was. It was actually my first publication was on the newsworthiness of executions, and man, it when you were executed really was a big predictor whether or not you were going to get in the newspapers. Because if it was something on the weekends, your story was not going to make it. So we have to wonder, does the state of New York do that because they know it's going to make headlines in New York City on a Friday? Because hey, this is a deterrent, right? If everybody knows about it, it's a deterrent. So maybe that was part of the calculation into why they were doing it on a Thursday.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
That makes sense because traditionally, like the Friday paper is like the biggest paper other than the Sunday edition, so it's like the most news. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, Eric, when you were there, you saw the electric chair itself? You got to see old Sparky?
So here I've been lucky enough to be in 2 death rows, Louisiana's and Kentucky's.
Ooh, what a lucky man he was.
So I wasn't able to see the old Sparky or the death row per se, but we did go through the area where it used to be. But so I was able to see Kentucky's old electric chair. And again, this was in the early 90s. I was there just kind of like what we do with our students over at Roger Williams. We take our students on a tour. When I went to the Kentucky State Penitentiary, they took us over to death row and took us down into the basement where they had the electric chair, and they were very proud. Oh, we just cleaned it up. They were telling us how they had to clean it up and why, because they say, oh yeah, people catch fire around their wrists and their ankles around the electrodes, and where we're making that connection with electricity. So yeah.
Is it ever remarkable to you how they try to engage in this cute branding where calling the electric chair old Sparky removes the violence from it, that like the harm it's actually inflicting on people, and makes it seem like just another object?
Yeah, it really is. It's really quite sickening what we do in society when we do this, where we say, hey, it's old Sparky, and turn it into a joke, which I'm sure for a lot of people in society it is, and it's part of the reason why we keep it hidden and removed. Hey, this is a bad person and they did something horrible, and people are, and we see it in Texas. There are 2 groups of people protesting the execute, or I guess there's one group protesting the executions that take place in Texas there in Huntsville, and then there's one group protesting the protesters, and they're there celebrating what the hell's going on. So yeah, they're protesting the people on the other side of the parking lot over there.
Jesus. Can you imagine protesting, like finding the time in your life to protest like in favor of someone dying?
Yeah. It always shocks me to be celebrating death. I don't know. It just shocks me all the time.
Yeah. These are some original own the libs types.
Yeah.
So historically, Sing Sing ran on the Auburn system. And I can talk ad nauseum about the Auburn system. But Eric, I'm going to let you take this one. Tell us about the Auburn system.
The Auburn system is kind of like the pinnacle of American industrialization in terms of building it bigger and better so that we can incarcerate more. We are putting boxes in front of boxes within boxes. So stacking tiers of cells, 3, 4 high, so that we can keep it cheap and then incarcerate a whole lot of people. And that's exactly what we did. So whenever folks see Shawshank Redemption and some of those opening scenes, and we see those cells stacked on top of one another, that's a scene from the old Ohio State Reformatory. And that is an Auburn-style institution where the cells are stacked on top of one another. Obviously, this isn't how we build them anymore. It's extremely dangerous for those people walking on the catwalks along the cells. We don't use bars anymore to have it as a doorway. We have actual doors, steel doors that are being used. But this was a very efficient way to build institutions. That again was all part of the industrial explosion that was taking place in the late 1800s, early 1900s in the United States, and this build them bigger and better, and we can just incarcerate more and more people.
Certainly, and in the Auburn system, it was this separate and silence inmates. So inmates were not allowed to speak to each other. They were forced to engage in labor as essentially penal slaves. a lot of the forced labor at Sing Sing was mining, but inmates would be forced to walk in lines and essentially march, wear stripes, and they couldn't even make eye contact. They couldn't talk to each other. They'd be sitting there eating, unable to speak to each other. So unable to speak to each other during the day, unable to speak to each other at night. And it was all about industry, obedience, and silence. So it's total silence all the time between inmates, no communication, and individual cells, walking in lockstep. And they called it this military style human chain. It's inmates were transported this way from their cells to the workplace. And this changed in the early 20th century. We saw some changes in rules, changes in the management, and it strayed away from the Auburn system. They got rid of the lockstep, they allowed talking, and they allowed inmates to engage in some recreational activities. So inmates could go outside and use the yard to play baseball or do other activities outside. And the whole purpose of this Auburn system initially was to improve the morals of inmates. And there's no conclusive proof that it did that. And you're not helping somebody rehabilitate if they can't speak.
Yeah, we're social beings. We need to be able to communicate with one another. And if you're forcing individuals to be silent, it's just not helping them in any way. If we look at the Eastern State Penitentiary and the Pennsylvania system, which was obviously a complete failure because of the high rates of suicide and problems with mental health. One of the major problems there was the absence of any interaction. Well, when we move over to the Auburn system, they're able to physically see one another, which I'm sure helped a little bit. But I think once they saw that individuals were able to communicate with one another, that not all hell was going to break loose, and prison wasn't going to absolutely lead to riot at all times. I think they gave up on the silence rule, which is obviously a very good thing, letting individuals talk and communicate with one another.
Yeah. And for those unfamiliar, we may have talked about it on a previous episode, but the Pennsylvania system was essentially solitary confinement. It was a competing system with the Auburn system that was primarily used in Pennsylvania, and really took off at Eastern State Penitentiary and Western State Penitentiary. And I believe it was also the Walnut Street Jail. And inmates were kept in separate cells that had a little side yard. They were not supposed to communicate with one another. They had a little workbench, a bed, and otherwise they just stayed in their cell the entire time. And they could not speak to anyone except for clergy. They were identified by number. If they were leaving their cell with a corrections officer, they had a bag put over their head, and they wore these felt-soled shoes so that they would not make any noise. They wouldn't attract any attention on the tier. And so the Auburn system that we talked about that was relevant at Sing Sing was in contrast to the Pennsylvania system. And they actually tried to do the Pennsylvania system at Auburn for a while. They had a unit, a wing that used the Pennsylvania system, and they found that too many inmates became sick, suicidal. It made them ill, and they started to exhibit more signs of what we would recognize today as mental illness. And they decided to stick with just the Auburn system instead.
Yeah, and it's this is the model. The Auburn model is what took off across the United States, and became the trend of how to not only build prisons but also how to manage them. So after giving up on the silence, we still had them walking in lockstep for a little while, but we eventually gave up on that as well. Closest thing we have to that in modern days is controlled movement, which I don't. Did any of the prisons you've worked at have controlled movements, or was it much more open?
We had a lot of controlled movement. Unless you were a worker, which we called trustees, it was all controlled movement throughout the facility. You would be escorting inmates, and especially inmates that were coming from max would always need two officers. They'd have to have leg shackles and handcuffs on at the same time. So we did do a lot of controlled movement.
It's the prison I was at in Kentucky, Green River Correctional Complex. It was kind of like, I wouldn't say a free for all, but yeah, there was, unless it was count time, where people were locked down for count, inmates were moving in any direction they pretty much wanted. They'd go to their job, they go to school, they could walk any direction on the sidewalks. Whereas, some of the higher security level prisons I've been to, everything is marked on the ground. Staff walks in the middle, inmates stay to the right. They're not allowed to step over to the left of a line. I've been able to see both the approaches to both, and United States Penitentiary down in Beaumont, very, very controlled. So inmates are only allowed out moving around on the sidewalks for a given time period, and then they lock them back up. Shut things down, so there's not a whole lot of open movement, unlike where I was working at. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, if you go to San Quentin in California, in part it feels like a college campus. There's people walking around on their own, just walking to class, walking from the church, something like that. Walking out to the rec yard. So there is more freedom given to inmates there within the confines of the prison itself. And it's interesting. Like, I don't know if you ever think about it like this, but we have had so much reform over time, but it's so imperfect still. Like there's no one system that we can look at and say that's a great model. That's a paragon. Norfolk in Massachusetts has a cool model where inmates have some limited form of self-governance. The doors don't lock, and they'll have stuff like an inmate band where they actually get some form of autonomy. But a lot of prisons don't have that. If you look to other countries that have much lower recidivism rates, it's thought maybe giving inmates more autonomy within the prisons is actually a helpful tool, because we're preparing them to better be on their own once they get out, to better have the tools that they need to succeed, because a lot of these people don't have the tools.
Prepping them for return to society by having them, act like they're back in society, rather than having everything be a controlled, every decision that they make is controlled.
That's not helpful.
Right.
Like if I'm going to bed at this time and eating 3 meals a day at these set times, and other people are doing all that for me, that doesn't help me. It doesn't teach me how to be an adult. It doesn't teach me how to get by on my own. And it's a very flawed system.
Yeah, it definitely is. I agree.
So let's talk about Sing Sing today. It is a maximum security prison, holds about 1,700 inmates. Currently, they are known for their rehabilitative programs. There's a whole slew of rehabilitative programs. I'm going to go through them quickly. They've got alcohol and substance abuse treatment. They've got anger management, educational programs, vocational programs, family development programs, guidance and counseling services, library and law library services, recreational programs, religious services, sex offender treatment, temporary release programs, trauma programs, transitional services, for reentry, veteran services, and volunteer services and programs. It's a lot.
That is definitely a lot.
And people...
Definitely. And you need that for that large of a population of inmates, you need to have a lot of different services. That's, if they do have 1,700 inmates, or even 15 or 1,300 inmates, that is a large population of individuals. And, being that it's max, we know they're going to be there for a long time. They need to have some services available to them.
For sure. It gives them something to do and something to help them rehabilitate. So often people from the outside will say, we shouldn't pay for that. Why should inmates get college education when we don't? But I don't think they recognize how helpful of a tool it is, and how much that education is going to help in getting that inmate to stop committing crimes when they're on the outside.
Right. And that's the thing I think a lot of Americans forget about, is that these individuals are going to return to society at some point. And, where do we want them to be when they walk back out of the doors? Do we want them to be, a better person, or do we want them to be a better criminal?
Yeah. And often I think there's still a rough sentiment in society of not wanting to see former inmates succeed, wanting to see them as the criminal, wanting to see them as this other. It's a mark. It is a I'm better than you. It is creating this us and them divide. It's not helpful.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And we do very little. And we're such a punitive society. We do very little in terms of reintroducing these folks to society. Supposedly we have this idea that if you commit a crime and you do your time, it's not over. You will forever do your time if it's known that you've committed a felony here in the United States.
Yeah, people are always going to be looking at you differently, and there's got to be a better way. And it's going to keep coming back to that. But Sing Sing offers all these programs. Some inmates want to be sent to Sing Sing. It's close to New York City, so there's easy access to family and other visitors. For anyone who's seen Mad Men, the town of Ossining is where the first couple seasons in part take place, where Don Draper and his family call home. And there's an officer when Betty Draper is in labor. Don ends up talking to a prison officer for a while in the family room at the hospital. But programs available at Sing Sing are usually not available at many other prisons. Inmates prefer it because it is close to the city, as I mentioned. That is also a problem in some ways because it might allow for some easier access to drugs and contraband. But it is referred to by some as this Plaza Hotel for maximum security prisons because it's this presumably beautiful. Would you call it beautiful?
I mean, the surrounding area is definitely beautiful, but I would not call the institution beautiful by any means. I mean, it's an old institution. There's nothing pretty about. I would say it's foreboding, if anything. I mean, it's intimidating as hell. It's not beautiful. I would say, again, thinking about those programs that are available, yeah, that's great. But that doesn't make it some pleasure camp or some beautiful place to be at. No way. It's I've been to a lot of other prisons that are far more aesthetically pleasing, I guess you could say. This one, when you arrive there, you're going to a prison. It's an institution for punishment. Very similar to some of these other old Auburn-style prisons that either are still standing or still being used. It's definitely a place for punishment.
Sing Sing is big on education, though, and last I checked, they were currently building a school that was going to allow for university classes, and the purpose there is to allow inmates to get degrees. So they took an abandoned dorm, they're developing it into a school, and if we look at recidivism in New York State, as of like 2021, I believe, it was about 42%. And if we look at recidivism for inmates that receive college degrees in prison, it's about 1/10 of that at 4%. So there's purpose there, and hopefully that the state of New York implementing a school in Sing Sing can be helpful and cutting down some of those recidivism rates and giving people options.
Right. No, it's a great, that's such a key aspect to it. Giving them options for when they get out of the institution to be able to find a possible job. So it's so key.
So key. Eric, are you ready to talk about some fun facts about
Absolutely.
Sing Sing?
Hit me with some fun facts. I would love to hear some fun facts about Sing Sing.
Did you know that Sing Sing has had a notable baseball team historically?
I did know that. I also know that they had a football team as well. Those are quite fun. Yeah, it's and the only reason I know that is is because I teach that sports and crime class, and we talk about sports inside institutions and get to have students talk about that a whole lot. Yeah,
oh, that's pretty cool. Hey, what can you tell me about their football team? Anything to report on?
Well,
that?
So it's no longer, their football team is no longer around. But in the 30s, they had a football team. They had football and baseball, and I'm trying to think. The football team was called the Black Sheep. Rather fitting, right? But they were sponsored by the New York Giants. And so the New York Giants owner was actually we're sponsoring them. It's quite interesting. You think about today, what would it take for an owner of a professional sports team to sponsor anything in prison? Because these owners won't do anything that has to do with goodwill unless it's going to pad their own pockets. But
yeah, how is it going to benefit me?
Right. So, they had a team that the football team I know lasted for about 5 or 6 years. And once they banned revenue, once the state said, no, you can't sell tickets, it pretty much was the end of the football outside of Sing Sing. There are plenty of other states that have, especially down south, they have football between the prisons. It's great. It's fascinating to have sporting events where they take a busload of inmates from one prison to another and have them participate in the sporting event. It's something out of, an Adam, what did Adam Sandler's, what was it? What was the movie, the football movie in prison?
The Longest Yard.
Go. Have them, remake that with a real game. But yeah,
that's pretty cool to hear about. And in the early 20th century, baseball was huge there. And so the Sing Sing's baseball team, the Ossining Orioles, they were well known at the time, even outside the prison. And the Yankees even came to play against them, and I believe it was 1929. And even when Babe Ruth was on the team, and he hit some home runs out of there. Yankees came to play inside the prison, and of course the Yankees won 17-3.
Hey, the inmates scored 3 runs.
But
that's phenomenal.
Expected. Still, yeah, right. Good for them.
Yeah.
The Yankees, like you're going up against Babe Ruth. You're not expected to win. You're going. You're the Washington Generals going up against the Globetrotters here.
That's phenomenal. 3 runs. That's amazing.
Sing Sing has also been seen in a number of films, especially in the 1930s and 40s. It became a popular backdrop, especially for films featuring James Cagney. And so it was used as late as like 1995 for remakes of Kiss of Death and for Bullet. And Warner Brothers Studios filmed a number of features here, and they actually donated funds for a prison gymnasium in 1934.
That, of course, that they're going to, if they can make some money, they're gonna use it. Oh yeah, we'll pimp our prison out so that you guys can, possibly film something here. But that's got to be a total pain in the ass for the staff, though. I'm trying to think of how.
Can you imagine?
No.
I remember they filmed part of the butterfly effect was that there was a scene filmed in a Washington state prison, and one of our notorious inmates at the jail I worked at, who had murdered a prison officer, he was actually seen in the background of the film. He can be seen in the butterfly effect as an extra.
Really? That's fascinating.
Yeah, pretty weird.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, eventually we should do some kind of episode just about prison and film.
Yeah.
Or specific films even.
Yeah. No, that
my last sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say that sounds like a great idea, but I'm sure there's all kinds of different films in terms of that have been filmed, or that were produced and filmed in these places where that they're either shut down or still in operation, where they were able to make all kinds of money off of, off of having somebody from Hollywood come and say, "Hey, we need this space over here because making a prison movie or something it's got to be one of those settings where it's got a cheaper just to use an actual prison."
Oh, I'm sure. But as a location scout, how do you know which prisons to go into? That's got to be the weird part.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm willing to bet that there's a bunch of them, kind of like you said, that there are go-to places in Hollywood that will say, okay, yeah, let's go film here. And they know they can get access. They've done it before.
Yeah, good point. So my final fun fact, marble. So there are a number of buildings made from marble that was mined by Sing Sing inmates, such as NYU, the Grace Church, the New York State Capitol building, and the U.S. Treasury building are all made of marble mined by inmates at Sing Sing.
That's fascinating. I guess they took it and they put it right on the ships and move it down the river, huh?
So would you say that films made at Sing Sing are all part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Oh, my. Oh.
All right, I'll show myself out. Goodbye, everybody.
No. that might be a good transition over to our movie minute.
Is it?
Indeed. That's enough Sing Sing for today.
All right, I guess it's time for the movie minute. Here we go. Movie minute. Movie minute. 60 seconds with producer Britt to talk about movies. 60 seconds on the clock. All right, boys. As we discussed on last episode, this week I watched 2006's Holiday in Handcuffs. This is a movie about the triumph of kidnapping over the power of love. Fired waitress and down on her luck daughter, Melissa Joan Hart, is dumped right before the holiday season. In an effort to get a boyfriend to come join her family holiday, she kidnaps Mario Lopez, a successful real estate vice president, with an antique gun. At family holiday, Lopez decides to pretend to be the ultimate boyfriend in order to make Joan Hart's arrest even more bittersweet. The plan goes through, and Joan Hart is arrested, and Lopez is reunited with his rich, prissy fiancée. But he has a change of heart, otherwise known as Stockholm Syndrome, and ends up falling for Joan Hart's character. Like, what did I just watch? The best performance in the film by far is the kinky Irish shopkeeper who tells Mario Lopez to back his ass up real slow. The dad obviously played George Bush in multiple franchises, including That's My Bush and the Crocodile Hunter movie. This movie was painful and felt like a holiday in handcuffs of my very own.
Give it some stars.
This one gets 1.5 soups. 1.5 soups for this one. Yeah, I also did watch 2 more Christmas movies around the same time. 1984's Gremlins, which is an absolute delight, and 2023's The Holdovers by Alexander Payne, which is also an absolute delight in spite of the accusations against Alexander Payne.
Now, I want to provide a counterpoint for Holiday in Handcuffs because, you see, I watched it as well at a different time, and it was somewhat painful, but it was not without its laughs. There's a scene. Melissa Joan Hart goes in to see her parents while Mario Lopez is waiting in the car in handcuffs, and she says to her parents, "Oh, this is my boyfriend. Watch out. When he gets embarrassed, he will make jokes about how he's being kidnapped." And then he comes in and he goes, "Help, I've been kidnapped." And they laugh at him and they go, "Oh, he's such a joker." That's great. That's comedy right there.
Perfect setup, right?
Yeah. It was entirely implausible. It expects you to suspend your disbelief to a crazy level. I am still not sure how she got an antique gun. That the restaurant just had antique guns.
I don't recall. I think it was like her grandma's or something, right? The old Broadway lady, because she has it later, and she holds to a cop. Remember, like the cops come in to arrest them, and she has the gun now. Yeah.
I can't tell you.
And the grandma served no purpose in the film other than to be drunk.
She was just the drunk comic relief of, oh, look, grandma's drunk again and talking about her glory days on Broadway. That was, yeah.
Indeed.
I can't tell you, based off of the review, how happy I am that I did not get to see this.
Yeah, you get the easy part of the podcast. Like you just get news and comment on
prison,
stuff, and I have to watch 2 hours of that. I mean, it was like 85 minutes, but it felt like twice as long.
I found it brisk and a Christmas delight.
Great.
Mm-hmm. That you're far more forgiving, I can tell.
Yes. Or just has worse taste.
So
one of them.
That's fine too. Tomato. So, producer Britt, what's the movie for next?
Oh, that's
next
a good question. Do y'all have any ideas of what I should watch? Any carceral or law-related films?
I had a student. In my corrections class, I have students review prison movies and talk about specifically the realities of it. I did have a student in the past who they have to select 3 movies to review. He did the Caged Heat series.
I was just gonna recommend Heat. Let's see if I have this. Yeah, I've got Caged Heat.
It's a whole series.
Caged Heat 1, 2, and 3000.
Yeah. Exactly. And those are the 3 that he.
So I think Caged Heat.
Yeah, I could do Caged Heat. I got Caged Heat.
That could be a good series for you too.
I guess I'll start with the first one from 1975, and then the other 2 in the 90s. Maybe if this one's tolerable enough, I'll go through.
Wow, that's impressive. That's impressive.
I think Medea Goes to Jail would have been an acceptable alternative
okay,
too.
Maybe next time, but this time we're gonna go for Caged Heat.
All right.
Please make sure to like, rate, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. I've been Professor Beck Strah, joined by my colleague and friend, Dr. Eric Bronson, and producer Britt. All right, that's it. It's time for Lights Out.